It's a cowboy.
I'm sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
All right, I'd like to call this meeting of our instruction work group to order. Board members will notice that you have our policies. We'll be looking at fee this evening in front of you. I'm going to turn it over to Cindy Green to take us through the first policy after we approve the minutes, and we have no public comment this evening. I move to approve the minutes from the instruction work group meeting dated March 4th, 2024.
Second, Nikki Vanderbeek.
All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Motion carries 6-0. All right, and with that, we will start talking about our graduation policy.
Thank you so much, Board Chair Muldrow. Before we dive into the policy, I'm just state a few things and then dive in. I'm gonna orient you to the packets that you have in front of you. First, you have 3 different documents for each policy. The documents have the current MMSD policy. The second document is a Google Doc that is a red line of the current policy. And the third document is the printed version that we have made changes to the Neola platform that we are using and the Neola policies.
Okay.
So I'll once we get to each policy, I'll walk you through what's in your packet.
Okay.
Nikki.
I figured it out.
In addition to that, I wanted to state that this is the first iteration of us doing a new process for policies. The policies that you have in front of you are ones that we've talked about at some point throughout this year and or last year through instruction work groups. And places where we've lifted that there's changes that are needed to be had. I will acknowledge on the front end that this being a new process, it may feel a little clunky. I apologize in advance, and it may feel messy as we're trying to navigate a couple of different documents, but we wanted to make sure that the board had everything in front of them in terms of our process we went through, so you could see our thinking as we began to make revisions and updates to the policies. The second thing I'll say is this is a reminder that this is the first round that the board will see this. We hope tonight will be an opportunity for any feedback or changes the board would like to see. And then we'll bring a second iteration of these back to the board in May for one final review before we vote at the end of the month. Sound good?
Sounds great, actually.
Okay, wonderful. Then Jesse, I'm gonna have us start with the graduation policy. What each team is going to do is they're going to just lift for you kind of the 4 or 5 major changes that we made in the policy and the rationale for it. We won't walk through every single red line change, but we'll tell you kind of the overview of the things that we thought were most significant to change in the policy. And I am gonna turn to the first one, which is our graduation policy, over to our executive director of secondary programs and pathways, Mary Jankovic. She's joining us virtually. And Jesse, if you wouldn't mind pulling up the, yeah.
Okay. Oh,
So the top packet that you have is the graduation policy. The one that you see in green is what we have made changes to in Neola. We did have some glitches, so it's not perfect. I will recognize that. And I think it's okay because it's in draft form. The second document underneath is the red line version, and the bottom document of that first pile is our current policy. Just so you know what you have in. I'm gonna ask Mary to walk through our major changes to the policy, and then we will pause. I'll turn it back to the board chair, Muldrow, for any questions and feedback for this policy, and we'll go through the same process for the other 2. Mary, take it away.
All right, thank you, Ms. Green. So good evening, board members, and good evening, everybody else that actually is kind of sitting around the table. It's nice to see everybody. So I'm going to be basically focusing on the Neola policy document that you all have in front of you, and we'll kind of go through this. So There are four major or four changes I'd like to highlight for each of you. So if we go to number 2, where it says distribution of credits, if you go to number 7, I want to recognize that this is around personal finance, and we have had a personal finance requirements or in our board docs since 2016, or in our graduation policy, my apologies, since 2016, but we are highlighting it here and aligning it directly with the state statute, calling it out for starting in the graduation of 2028. So that is one significant change here. If we drop down to number 6, it says graduation for portfolio. We've aligned the language directly to Neola. Again, the graduation for portfolio is used in small pockets, but we wanted to align this directly with Neola and what they had suggested. If you go to number 9, this is an additive to our graduation policy, and we're specifically calling out newcomers in what you see in number 9 as uninterrupted service. So we've called out that one. And the last one is number 10 around alternative education. And again, aligning this directly to Neola. And we just wanted to codify the language and again, directly align this to Neola. So just kind of calling out those 4 within the document.
I'm going to add a little more clarification to us too that Mary just mentioned. So the component related to English learners and students that may come to us as newcomers or those with interrupted schooling and have limited English proficiency, we wanted to ensure that there was some flexibility in their ability to earn a diploma within MMSD and align to NICE requirements, but potentially not be constrained by some of the additional requirements that we have in our graduation policy. The number 10 alternative education diploma, this is a practice that we have had in our district for a very long time. If you remember through a lot of our MOA, effective partners, we allow for a way for students to earn a diploma outside of credits and outside of a portfolio. Operation Fresh Start is an example, Gateway to College. Neola recommended this language and we wanted to add it just to codify some of the practices that we have and have it in policy so it isn't always having to go through the MOA process for the diploma seeking component. We would obviously go through the MOA for a partnership, but not necessarily for this component. We felt like this allows us to broaden. And then the last thing in terms of the portfolio, as Jerry mentioned, we allow for students to graduate by a portfolio if you have an IEP. And we also a few years ago approved that for Capital High through their competency-based model. Neola recommends having a portfolio model for any student if that is the best path forward for them to earn a requirement. We've already done that at places such as Metro and have a really strong process to do that. This again kind of codifies it so it opens it up for all students if that is their best path forward. I will pause there. I will turn it back over to Board Chair Muldrow and then see what's coming up for board members.
Board Member Vandermeulen and then Board President Nichols.
Thank you very much. Number 10, an alternative education plan specific to specific to portfolio. Actually, I know that they're opening it up to everyone, and I think that can be good in limited situation. What I'm afraid of is that kids that get a behavioral rap, for example, labeled as like a troublemaker, etc., will be encouraged to do portfolio because people don't want to teach them. I don't want that to be coming out. I don't know how to avoid that, but I really don't want to, oh, they're difficult to teach, so let's just say portfolio and do it that way and be done with it.
Yeah, I think our practice and our procedures that we align that follow this will be really important to make sure that criteria is really clear so it doesn't become just this default.
The other one that I have is a unique situation, and that's on physical education and making it a graduation requirement. As someone who had to get DPI permission to not have it as a graduation requirement due to disability, my school did not have adaptive PE. And after they insisted I be in archery, which would have been a threat to everyone involved for obvious reasons. We had to fight to get DPI permission. My question is, can we have an opt-out if there's a medical excuse or a disability excuse? Can we put language in there that says if it's excused?
Yeah, we have a procedure already that allows for that, and there's also an online option for students to take that. We have adaptive PD, so we have some of those already in place. We'll look at that to make sure.
Can we just link it somehow or say policy found here? Because sometimes it's hard. And I have only one more question, Chair, because I get this a lot. I get emails every year from the dance team saying that they consider that the school considers it a sport, but so why do they still have to take PE? Is there a way we could make for someone who's on the competitive dance team where they are a school athlete, that it could help as a PE requirement?
So I think you're talking about PERC, where it's
Yes.
placement credit right now, and I think Jay and Jeremy are on, so I'll have them add to the state. Right now, PERC is only allowed for WIAA sanctioned sports. That isn't our choice. It's what WIAA sanctions as sports, and unfortunately, dance is not identified as a WIAA sanctioned sport. So I think that's a place where we can have conversations at a high level. But I will
That's
see if
frustrating.
Jeremy, I don't disagree. I'll see if Jeremy wants to chime in. Oh, hi, Jeremy.
Hi, actually, we did shift that when we moved our PERC policy to 3 seasons. And for our school sports that are covered by our athletic code, dance and cheerleading are both included for the ability for physical education replacement credit, as 1 year of that participation counts as 1 season to kind of make sure that we're consistent across time expectation. So those 2 sports which are covered by our athletic code are included in our PERC policy.
That is correct.
Wonderful.
Thank you for reminding me that we made that change the last time we made that update. Good thing you're here. So there you
And then can we put a little link to just say policy here?
go. It's in there when we have the final clean.
Oh, good.
Once it's all cleaned up,
Yeah, I kind of.
it'll be much clearer.
But otherwise, great job. I'm done, Chair.
Board President Nichols?
Thank you. I can see this cleaned up version in the Neola side, and I've been able to track how the numbers shifted and replaced, so thank you for that. My one question is on the portfolio, graduation by portfolio. In the red line version, there's a reference to board resolution adopted with a blank line. Date of adoption permits students to earn credit by demonstrating competency. So, and I don't see, I see the reference to the board resolution, but does that get filled in with something? Do you want to talk about, like, is there a resolution that
So if,
get
it's-
attached to that?
so yes, if
Okay.
we decide to go this path and any feedback from this, when we come back the second time around, we will add that in. Neola has suggested language, and we will add that in. And when you vote on the policy, all of that would be updated as well. Our current policy has a graduation by portfolio for students that we adopted a few years back, specifically for Capital High. It doesn't specify Capital High, but it was for Capital High. What we are doing is we are just shifting the language based on how Neola says that we should ensure a portfolio happens and criteria. I can tell you what number it's to.
Yeah, because I see in the original policy, graduation by
Yeah,
portfolio
number
was number
11.
11. And then now in the Neola version, it's number 6.
We had a lot of this similar content that Neola had, but Neola's language is simplified
Yeah, it
and
is
cleaner.
much simpler.
So we're just trying to, that's why I said I think it is a little confusing this first time, so I appreciate the patience. But so what we were trying to do is use Neola's language as much as possible versus the MMSD created original.
Okay,
Does that make sense?
yes. Okay, thank you.
Board Member Simpkin.
So my first question I have for you, Cindy, is,
Yes.
can you talk a little bit more about why there is a desire to expand flexibility around graduation portfolio?
Absolutely. So we have many spaces that work in similar to Capitol High that have competency-based and or have ways where staff are trying to focus more on standards-based grading and or approaches to learning that are beyond just seat time and Carnegie credit. When we think about project-based learning, when we think about some of our alternative spaces such as Metro, some of our in-house alternative options, we want to allow an opportunity for students to not be tied to seat time and credit, but to be able to do deep learning, interdisciplinary learning. And we believe allowing that will be more authentic for some of our students in terms of how they learn. And we also believe that that's something that could span at the comprehensive high schools over time, where we aren't focused so much on a 7-period day and half credit, but could allow for opportunities for students to do more experience-based learning in the field, could do, again, like interdisciplinary projects, etc., that cross over content areas, but would still meet the skill and knowledge necessary.
So who are the staff that oversee that work?
Well, currently, it's a variety of staff. Some of Mary's department does, our Office of Youth Reengagement focuses on that right now. And then the principals at Capitol High with Jay's leadership. So it's across all, I would say all divisions of high school.
And what are the expectations for the contents of the book?
So we have an entire like codified document that indicates how students would meet those competencies based on standards. Everything's aligned to the standards. Assessments that align with that, as well as different components. I'll see if Mary wants to add more detail to that, and then we can also share with the board if they're interested in it, what some of that documentation looks like. We've done a lot of work in terms of making sure it's a very rigorous process, but Mary was heavily involved when Capitol was doing that work. So Mary, anything beyond what I've said?
Yeah, no, thank you, Cindy, and thank you for the question. Absolutely. So when developing a competency model that leads right to graduation, an alternative graduation and portfolio is all around the identified like power standards that you choose per grade level. And like Cindy had indicated, there are on-demand assessments that go with that. So you're aligning directly to the standards with assessments, and really a heavy lift in having students like demonstrate their knowledge, but always having the time to be able to come back and reflect and redo to be able to gain that knowledge and that standard. If it didn't happen right away, they have an opportunity to come back at it multiple times to gain mastery.
Okay, thank you for that additional information. I'm trying to process this with what feels like I'm gonna want a lot more information, because this feels like a paradigm shift in how we consider graduation. If it's gonna be an option to be more available to students. And so I'm definitely interested in knowing what goes into the portfolio itself, how much time is expected to be allocated to creating it, and then what the staffing around that looks like. I'm also interested in if you were to crosswalk that with goals for literacy and math, and how those intersect with with that? I mean, I know we're talking about graduation, so we're beyond, you know, some of those foundational skills at that point, but I'm curious to know what that would look like if you have a student who has struggled to meet foundational literacy and math and then is creating a portfolio for graduation.
We have a couple samples. We have, one that we've used in special education very often. We have what we currently have for students in regular education if they're either in Metro or at Capital. So I think we'll make sure prior to this next round that comes back to you that you all could see what that, at least the process and kind of the documentation, that I think that'll help.
Okay, if there's a way to crosswalk that with what students who are not doing a portfolio are doing, which is, I guess, this document, that would be helpful.
Yeah, it's kind of documented throughout there, so you'll be able to see.
Okay.
We'll make sure you get it. Absolutely.
Board Member Mosner Feldman.
Thanks. I have a lot of the same questions as you. As a before, I'm super interested in expanding graduation by portfolio. It's so, like, if you've ever experienced it, it's so good when students are able to like, get support to put all their learning together. It's just like, wow, beautiful. Which makes me wonder about what on-demand assessments are, because it's like, when I think of on-demand assessments, I think about some of the software that we buy, which is like totally different from how I would think about it. So I'm curious, Mary, if you're still.
Yep, I'm here. I
You
can
wanna
speak
talk
to
about
that.
The assessments that were created at Capital.
Sure, absolutely. So on grade, on-demand assessments were by, I can speak for Capital, right, specifically, or created by grade level, by the standard, the power standards that were chosen. And as each standard is identified for each quarter, i.e. each semester, a assessment then is at the end to see where students are and whether they are proficient in those standards or not. And if they're not, then they carry over and they still keep demonstrating and trying to meet proficiency on those on-demand assessments. So they were created in-house, but they were all around what the standards were. So it kind of gets away from a multiple of tasks to be doing, like within a classroom, and you're kind of going toward one lane, one final destination toward the assessment.
Thanks. I guess my next couple of thoughts are like, I know that there's like, we want policies that are policies and policies that are not procedures. And so the thing that I wonder is like, right, a portfolio could mean anything based on how it's written here. And there's, I want it to be really good. So I'm just curious about like how folks are thinking about that, right? Like the move to like a more bare bones policy. Like I guess we would see the documentation and the procedures and go from there. And the other question I have is about like, this is portfolio by course, not portfolio, not a summative senior portfolio. Could we ever imagine that would be, that we could, maybe not, maybe it's gotta be course by course because our graduation requirements are critical credit. And that's just the world we live in. So I no worries about that last question. I'm looking forward to seeing some of the,
I think one thing, and we've talked about this before, but I'll just kind of restate it, is that once policy is codified, we create procedural manuals and guidance documents. The procedural manual that already exists to support the graduation policy is pretty in-depth, so people know those steps. In addition, however we land here, if it's the portfolio approach moving forward, that would be in that procedure and it would be codified. And back to Nikki's original statement, we would make sure that there's continue to be tight criteria around what that looks like, who is best situated for that and why before just moving forward. But again, happy to share the draft samples that we have.
Would love it. Thanks.
Board Member Simkin.
Okay, so now Blair just said something that now questioning my understanding of what this means. So I was actually reading this as a summative document for graduation. And that's not the case. This is a summative document for a class that is required for graduation.
So this is where the stuff from Neola is a little confusing. So Neola allows you to make a choice. There's two kind of check boxes there. And to Michelle's original question, the second one is about adoption of a resolution that allows you to move forward with that as a full approach, not necessarily credit by credit, course by course. And so we could go either way. Our current practice that is outlined in our policy allows it for graduation by a portfolio, meaning you accumulate over time and it's the way you graduate. So that is a place of determination. By credit meaning content area or overall.
Can you describe just a little bit more what you mean about accumulating?
Sure, so instead of a student having to demonstrate their learning for every class via portfolio versus a grade, right? Right now, a student at East High School takes algebra and they earn credit and pass that course by getting a D or higher. By that, if we do it by portfolio, the student would demonstrate their learning of knowledge and skills of that class through a portfolio, through artifacts versus a grade, and they would have to do that for every class. If we mean accumulating, then you could think differently about how a student's schedule is operating, meaning a student would not have to be in 6 periods a day, 5 periods a day. They could be in courses similar to how we have Capital High, where their schedule is modified, their schedule is more flexible. They take courses that sometimes integrate together and they're able to earn credit, if you will, for more than one class at a given time because of the way you are demonstrating your learning and the way the teacher is approaching. I feel like I'm causing more confusion than clarification.
No, I mean, it's fascinating. So I'm gonna have one more follow-up and then I'm gonna pass it to the next person.
Yep.
Questions. Do we have schools that are doing this already that are models that?
Yep, so we have programs that are doing it and then Capital High is already doing this.
I guess.
You mean
I guess schools was the wrong word. I guess.
Oh, yeah,
That are doing this on like a
Mhm.
wide scale.
absolutely.
Okay. I'd love to get some links to some of that information.
Board Member Vandermillen and Board President Nichols.
My question on the alternative schedule, and again, this is similar to my other worry, is the fact that when we had shortened day for individuals with special ed, we ended up with students with the most severe disabilities having the least amount of time in school. How do we make sure with a portfolio that we are not putting those students the least amount of education and the least amount of time?
So two things. So one, I wanna just make sure I clarify one thing. Per DPI, a school that is identified as an alternative school, such as Capital High, already has that flexibility because they aren't tied to seat time like the school is.
Right.
We still make sure that they have their students there full time and we still have them follow many of our district processes. The second will be kind of what I had said before, our criteria for decision-making around who would be best situated to graduate via portfolio versus Carnegie credit would still be something we want to ensure is there. I think for us, the idea of graduating and having this as an option is what we see as actually a more rigorous option in some ways versus a modified option, because it really allows students to have hands-on authentic learning opportunities that is relevant across spaces out in the community as well. So we actually see it as a real viable option, but I understand the unintended consequences.
I also worry on those who are self-starters.
Mhm.
There are some individuals who, I'm using myself as an example. You give me a 20-step process that is due at the end of the semester. If you don't check, I'd be happy to get all the night before if physically possible.
And you still have
That-
teachers and everything.
Okay, wanted to make sure on
Not
that,
like independent, yeah.
because I didn't want just independent
Yep.
study.
No, that's not what this is. Thanks.
Got it. Thank you, Chair.
Board President Nichols?
Thank you. Okay, I just need to do a check for understanding. So in the current version of the graduation policy, before it got redlined and renumbered, we already have graduation by portfolio.
Or-
Yeah, so this is not new.
Correct.
Okay. And then I just want to make sure, so there was some language in the original that talked about Common Core, state standard, core benchmarks,
Yep.
literacy and math and science, do competency-based teaching and a Carnegie credit unit and demonstrate mastery of the graduate vision through a performance assessment model. Okay, so some of that language was then stricken or struck. You know what I'm
Mhm.
trying to say. And it was streamlined down right into this kind of the green version from Neola. So it's basically saying we still are a district that would like to offer graduation by portfolio. And instead of listing all of the things that were in the original language, we have an option of saying that students could graduate by earning portfolio credits. Or is it and? They could also graduate by demonstrating competency through kind of a cumulative high school portfolio. Is it do we have to choose, or can we leave that discretion for either the type of school or program that is really cultivating the mastery around portfolio?
Two things. One, we can absolutely leave it for both and.
Okay,
100%. And two, just thank you for going back to that. Yes, we have had a portfolio option for students with an IEP and for students without an IEP for a few years now. Based on the Capital High model is when we changed it for all students.
mhm,
And what we are trying to do is get closer to where Neola is recommending policy language to be as much as possible. And so our language was pretty wordy.
Yeah.
And we are trying to just shift and use Neola's recommended language for this component. So again, this component existed, cleaning up language as much as possible to align to Neola. We are not perfect in adopting Neola's policy straight as is,
mhm.
because that just wouldn't be Madison, but we're trying to get closer as much as possible and use their.
Okay, so I would just like to offer this as an example, if it helps for my board member Simkin in particular. One of my sons, who started at a comprehensive high school, had made it through sophomore year and was not on track to graduate by credit. Okay, at that point, we knew, we should probably start looking for some alternative pathways. One of the options that we chose and that he was asked to kind of select because of the fit was to go to Capital High. And what was attractive about Capital High was that this was a young learner who already had not had quite the success in like doing the traditional type of learning that gets you the credit. And so what we loved about Capital was that it then became portfolio based. So he had a new opportunity to demonstrate his learning, his intelligence, what he was picking up without the pressure of like what he had just come out of in a comprehensive high school. Do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So he was at Capitol High building this portfolio. If he had stayed junior and senior year, he would have had this kind of cumulative demonstration of what he had learned. Without having to meet like the 22 credits. Do you know what I mean? Because it was another way to help him actually demonstrate what he had learned and to still meet the graduation requirements. In that particular child's case, he did about a year at Capitol. And he decided that maybe that wasn't the best fit for him. And then we went to the next thing in our graduation policy, which was alternative education. And he ended up at Operation Fresh Start. And because our graduation policy allows young people who need an alternative education to find other ways to earn credit, to demonstrate their learning, to also, you know what I mean? It ended up being a great fit for him. So I don't know if that helps, but it's because I know you're asking more specifically about like, ooh, what goes into the portfolio.
Right.
But I just wanted to share that to say like, I think it's important that our graduation policy has a variety of ways that young people can demonstrate the ways that they learn, still have some, rigorous expectations about what they can demonstrate and yeah, meet our graduate vision. And I think portfolio, alternative, and kind of our traditional credit bearing approach is important.
Can we do like a little back and forth here?
Yeah.
So I'm curious. So in my work, I work with adults who do college classes that in achieve credentials via portfolio. And so I'm trying to take that word and make it fit into this context. So that's where I'm trying to give it like a picture of what this actually means.
Yeah.
So for your son, you're
Yeah.
saying that the portfolio was not something that he sat down one day or for a week or for a month and pulled together. It was an accumulation of his work.
Yes.
over time.
Yes, because he was still in school like a certain number of periods a day, right? And so if he's getting his half credit in art, he would then have selected maybe some of the work that he was most proud of and added that to his portfolio. Then he had an English class, right? And so it might have been an essay a 3-paragraph essay or something like that, that he might have added to the portfolio. So it was like different ways of showing
And there's
across
clear
courses, yeah.
there's clear benchmarks along the way to ensure students are meeting that, but yes, I mean, it's a way for students to demonstrate their brilliance. Outside of just our traditional approach, which works much better for some of our students.
Additional questions from board members?
I have one.
Board member Mosner Felton.
The thing that makes me nervous about it, that's one that I can grab onto, is like, let's say I'm teaching US History 9. And I have a student who is not finding success in my traditional. There's 9 units, there's a test, we have an essay and a test in each one. And they say, hey, according to board policy, I'm permitted to earn credit by demonstrating competency or creating a learning portfolio. I'm gonna do that. Like, I would not be in a position to say okay to that. So like, just like temporally. So like how does a student avail themselves of this policy, I guess? What kind of thinking are you doing?
So currently, it's based on program type, so
Right.
opt into or choose to attend a program or one of our schools, that's the way we make that decision. For moving forward, as we broaden this, that will be part of, I think, the procedures that we develop. I don't believe, if you were to ask me today and what we've started to draft thus far, I don't think it's an individual kind of opt-in decision at that point. It's part of a larger conversation in terms of thinking through so students plan for graduation and post high school. but that part of it beyond the programs that we currently offer it is interesting. Mary, I don't know if you want to add anything to that just based on your work.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. I think that, absolutely thank you for, giving your, board member Nichols, giving your personal, story around your son. I think that was extremely helpful and kind of an aha moment for everybody. So I just want to thank you for that. I don't want people to confuse, like, a student can sit in a credit bearing class and then all of a sudden to opt out to say, hey, I want to go for portfolio, right? That's then determined by the program that they're in, as Cindy had indicated, right? And again, when we talk about portfolio, and what students are doing, as board member Nichols mentioned about her son, and maybe he was taking an English class and wanted to provide the essay that he had demonstrated. Let's all be mindful when it's portfolio, he might have attempted that essay 2 and 3 times, getting direct feedback from that teacher to then have a proficient piece to be able to go into the portfolio. So it's not a one and done. It's not something that he was able to do the night before and work on and then get feedback from the teacher. And then all of a sudden it goes in the portfolio and they're just kind of breezing by like that. So I just want to be mindful of, right? It's around skills and standards and multiple attempts and meeting students where they're at versus just entering a class saying, okay, everybody here is in Algebra 1 and here we all go. And I'm expecting everybody to have this knowledge base coming in, right? So it's meeting those students where they're at. And then students really owning their learning, as board member Nichols mentioned before, right? He got to choose what he wanted to put in that portfolio. Maybe it was the English essay, maybe it was, something around poetry, maybe it was this thing. So you're allowing students to have more agency and interest into what they're showing their demonstration of learning is around. Thank you.
I'm gonna add myself to the stack. So these are questions I would need answered in order to be able to vote for the revisions, and I'm sorry if I am missing something. Why do we want kids to have a semester more of physical education than humanities, language, visual arts, music, or theater?
That's a DPI requirement of 1.5 credits, so DPI requires.
Does DPI require the humanities credit?
That's an added portion that we put in MMSD. DPI does not require anything to humanities.
Okay, so there's no requirement by DPI around arts. There is a requirement around DPI around physical education.
At the high school level, yes.
Okay. What percentage of our high school students fail physical education?
I don't know offhand. We'd have to get you that.
Okay, if I can get that before we vote, it'd be really helpful. If I can also get a demographic breakdown of those students, so what percentage of those students are disabled, what percentage of those students are youth of color, a kind of a firm analysis of who is failing our gym classes, because we don't actually talk often about that phenomena, and I think it is an area that is a little bit different than other areas, right? Like, we kind of assume when a kid fails in math, it's because they're struggling with math. When a kid fails physical education, is the barrier actually engaging in physical education? Does that say something about that kid's health and fitness? Does that say something about that student's participation? How do we address that? In our original policy, we had a space that said 7th and 8th grade students can earn high school credit. I'm not seeing that in this version.
It's in here. It is at the
1C.
top. Yeah. Right
I know.
on the page.
Okay,
It's probably not in the right place right now, but it is at the top, and we copied that language straight from Neola just to align, but it's.
okay. I really appreciate that we're continuing to do that. What qualifies a student to graduate early, and how does this policy impact students who are excelling?
So students can graduate early. They can graduate after first semester junior year. As long as they've met all of their graduation requirements. There's another policy connected to that, and we have a process for that. The earliest the student can graduate early is first semester, after the first semester.
After the first semester of their junior year. So
Correct.
were a student to accumulate 22 credits by the first semester of junior year, they could graduate.
There is a grant, yes. And then
How many credits does the average student get per semester?
5.
5?
No, I'm sorry. Year, 4.5 for the year, 2.5 a
Per
semester.
semester?
Sorry, because it's 0.5 credits. Yeah,
Has that gone down?
not since I've
So if a student can get 5 credits, on average, 5 credits a year, and our policy requires you to have 22 credits to graduate. Over the course of 4 years, 5 credits on average a year adds up to 20 credits.
Yeah, I'm sorry, 5.5.
Okay,
Because they do, most kids take 5 to 6 classes a semester. 5 classes is 2.5.
Mhm.
6, I'm sorry, kids take 6 or 7. We have 7 periods. I'm thinking about teachers teach 5 of 7. Let me stop. Kids take 6 or 7 classes a semester. Each class is 0.5 credits. So for the year, if they take 6 classes, that's 6
that's,
credits at the end of the year. If they take 7, which is a full load, right? They only have 7 periods in a day. If they have 7, then they have 7 credits a year, which gives you 28 or 24. Some students for that 7th period choose to take a study hall, maybe doing experiential learning, etc. But on average, 6 classes.
so if students do max, right, they take 7 classes, they end up at the end of the year earning about 7 credits or 7 credits. Then they do that for 3 years, they're still at 21 credits at the end of their junior year. So the way that a student would graduate early would be to get high school credits in middle school or to engage in summer school. Otherwise, the earliest, if you're just kind of going from freshman year to junior year, the earliest possible amount of credits is 21 at the end.
There's a few other ways.
Okay.
So experiential learning credit students can earn, which is work credit, right? If they're doing work credit, they are able to earn credit for that. In addition to that, if students take college level courses, our college level courses are a 3-to-1 ratio.
Okay,
And so they're able to earn credit that way. But yes, middle school, summer school, experiential learning, TA, they can TA also.
Kids
Yeah.
will keep it.
We have a little bit of 0-0, not much these days. We had more pre-COVID. But those are some other ways that they can accelerate their opportunities. And the other thing to remember about graduating early is per DPI, you're required 4 years of English. And 4 years of English very often has some reduction to the number of students that are able to graduate early. It's not impossible, but that sometimes is a factor. But if you take college credit, then you're able to do that a lot easier.
okay. What percentage of our students do graduate early with our current policy?
Very few. I don't know the exact number, but few, I would say.
Okay,
Mary or Jay, do you know offhand? Sorry, I'll just ask them.
No, neither one of us do, but we can sure get a hold of that data.
okay, I greatly appreciate that. My last question is, if the board wanted to amend the credits related to arts and music, let's say we said, hey, taking arts and music is just as important as Phi-Ed. We want that requirement to be 1.5 credits. That brings us up to 18 credits that are just like, you know, required and in specific areas. Could we do that? What would stop us from doing that?
So I'll say, absolutely, if that is what the board desires, they can make that recommendation. What are some of the implications? I think the implications are determining at what graduating class that would start with and what that means for the courses that we offer, staffing, scheduling and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think the other thing about this is that that it does break down to like a staffing reality and our ability to provide the courses themselves. And I think that's the other reason looking at the max versus minimum or average that students earn per semester is relevant to how we think of this policy. Overall, I feel like I can support most of the changes we've made, and I look forward to getting to discuss this again and voting on it. I do, however, a greater breakdown around kids who are struggling with Phi-Ed and what we're gonna do to address that as a graduation specifically. Board Member Pearson?
Yeah, I just had a question. Thank you all for the questions. My questions around CTE and how it kind of fits in. I know that we are trying to make that shift in bolstering that program in that pathway for students. Not using pathway as in pathways, but just pathway for students.
A couple ways. So one, in addition to the 15 required credits that DPI has, you have to have an additional set of elective credits. That's most our CTE fits in there. In addition to that, there's an equivalency language where certain CTE courses can account for your math, your science, social studies, and English. So it's mostly math and science, but the equivalency for that as well. We did toggle as kind of teams discussing this concept of should we have part of our graduation requirement? You might remember this from last year, those of you that were here. Should our graduation requirement have where students have to graduate with an industry credential and or a certain number of college credits? This is the direction we're going. So that was another thing we were thinking about. We did not add that in here yet for a variety of reasons, but that would be another way to consider it. But the first two are currently how it's represented here.
Okay, so would a student have access to portfolio if they wanted to do like one of those credential type of programs, and not necessarily Operation Fresh Start, but if they wanted to have that kind of like career pathway?
Absolutely.
Okay.
We still have that.
Okay. That's it.
All right. Board Member Simkin, and if we can move on to the next policy.
Yep.
Thank you.
Can you talk about, so I'm gonna say that I think that for number 6, that this number that has been provided for us, we might not have enough bill to be able to say that it's clear enough as a policy. I'm wondering about the eligibility for a student to do portfolio and working that into the language of the policy, rather than the procedure. So right now, do you have an idea of what the expansion of eligibility is that you're looking for with this?
No, well, as I said before, it's in draft form outside of our current programs and our current high schools that offer this. We don't have finalized. We will, but we don't have that yet. It's just a draft.
Okay, I personally would like to have that be a part of the policy rather than a procedure
Eligibility component for portfolio, both for if we go in the direction of portfolio for credits for classes or portfolio for graduation. And then I am interested to know with a portfolio, a situation where a student who is graduating by portfolio would have a portfolio that is insufficient in order to graduate. Like, what does that look like? And then what happens?
I mean, in short, I would say the same thing that happens if a student is deficient or short in credits. There would be a graduation plan to have that student make that up.
So that would go probably beyond that 4 year.
Potentially, yeah, in the summer, hopefully we would be working with us far in advance of their into it when that happens, but
Okay.
I mean, I think my initial reaction is probably the same process that we use currently to ensure every student has a graduation plan and is on track for graduation. We have monitoring systems in place that would. I mean, that same process would apply regardless of the way you're graduating, is that on track process and working with that student.
Okay, I think when you send the follow-up information, it'll become a little clear for me what that actually means. I do have one last question.
All right, I just need my turn.
And I'll be done with these questions. I'm wondering, we're talking about eligibility. I very interested to know how this could impact and benefit advancement.
Did you say that again?
I'm interested to know how the portfolio credit or graduation by portfolio can be wrapped into advanced learner plans as well.
Oh, hold on.
That's it.
Can I make just a follow-up observation?
Yeah.
This is our first foray into policy, right? I mean, really red line, we take policy. And I think what I see happening and I hear is this tension between board sort of lane around policy, staff lane around implementation, right? And criteria and what do requirements say? And I hope, in a moment of truth here, I hope that we all know that we all are holding high expectations for kids, right? That's what I hear people saying. Nikki, you said something very nicely around wanting, to be sure there were expectations and we weren't sort of, limiting what kids can or can't do. So I am hopeful that as we work together around this, that we have a shared understanding that the implementation piece of it, we can certainly share that and have people see what that looks like, but technically as part of policy, that is part of what goes into this policy. But Cindy, I know you were talking about what we have. I know we have requirements. We have sort of these toolkits or implementations or set of directions around what is a student around portfolio, what does that look like? And we can certainly share those, but those are sort of the implementation side of it versus this is the policy side of it. And what we're going through is just a really natural occurrence here around how do we sort of differentiate the two of them. And what we don't want to have happen is every time we change a procedure, then we have to come back to the board for approval every time a procedure changes for whatever reason. So I'm just noticing sort of that's what we're all working through here. And I think that's okay. But I hope that people understand that our staff, our team also wants to hold kids to high expectations and provide the support certainly where it's necessary. So I just wanted to put that in the space.
Board member, please, one more question. Yep, it's not a policy question per se, it's just a procedural question for Monka. If a board member expresses, wanting to add something, so Laura mentioned she would like to add certain components to the policy, does she need to make a motion on the floor now to be able to request that to have 4 people? Or are we just adding things individually?
I don't think that requires a formal motion. If anything, I captured her notes in terms of you asked for language related to more details about eligibility, correct? So, but to answer your question, no, I don't think we need to get a certain number of board members to agree that they want that added. What could happen or what will happen at the end when it's time to vote, people may decide that they wanted, I'm still stuck on struck or stricken, removed. I heard TJ say removed. People may decide that they need something removed or needed added in order to vote, and then we'll have a conversation if it gets to that at that time. But at this point, you don't need to do that in order to move forward for consideration, because that's how I view it now. This is feedback for consideration. We'll see what it looks like when we put it all together and do the next round.
Okay, thanks. All right, we're moving on to our attendance policy.
Okay, I'm gonna invite 2 of my colleagues. I've got Dr. Esser here, and I have Laura Blob. Jesse, would you mind pulling that one?
Are we doing attendance scores?
Yes.
Similar to, I'll give them a minute to get set up and I'll introduce them. Similar to the graduation policy, we have 3 documents in front of you. It happens to be your last stack. In your pile. This one is a little cleaner. The last stack, it looks like, this has, some red and green. Hopefully everyone has it. You have the Neola version, yep, during attendance. You have the current policy and you have the red line policy. In addition to that, you have a policy that is mentioned within the attendance policy. It doesn't have changes, but we wanted to just have it all related to. Dr. Esser is our Executive Director of Student and Staff Supports. I think everyone knows her. I'm not sure if everyone knows Bob, who is our lead social worker, who also is one of the people that directly supports attendance. I'm gonna have them start and walk us through kind of the major changes to policy.
Great, I will get us started. So Wisconsin State Statute 118.68 really serves as the foundation for our overall absence policy. This statute outlines the legal requirements, regulations concerning attendance in schools across our state. So because of that, our latitude to make changes is relatively limited, given the statutory requirements. So last revised in 2015, our recommended changes align our policy with Neola and comply with state statute. Overall, our recommended changes also reflect language congruent with our approach and our values. For example, using they, them pronouns and the substitution of guardian for parent. And the Neola recommends clear definitions of excused and unexcused absences. And so we edited our policy, or making recommendations to edit our policy to clearly define what's an excused absence. And we added the definition for an unexcused absence. Additionally, while it is currently our practice, policy does not, it's not codified in policy, our makeup policy, sorry, let me just say that again. Currently our practice, we're recommending further codification of policy related to makeup for courseworks and exams when students are absent. Sorry, let me start that one over again.
Can I just add a little to that? I think this is a recommendation from Neola, and I want to just mention that we think this is critically important because across our schools and across our classrooms, this is a practice that some teachers implement, but this isn't a practice that I would say is universally implemented. So having this in policy and following the recommendation of Neola, we think it's really important.
And then the final recommended change is historically, our habitual truancy and truancy related policy has lived in our open enrollment policy. So rather than it living there, we are recommending it move into our attendance policy, which is pragmatic and simply intended to bring all of the attendance work together so that in one spot.
Let me just clarify that. We're keeping it in open enrollment.
Yes, thank
because
you.
it lives there, but we're carrying it over also to the place that it probably should be primary, which is the absence policy.
And that is the meat of what you will see today.
Board Member Vandermillen.
Yes, there's a really weird provision in here that's on allowing a student to be an elected official must have a grade point average of 3.0.
Yes.
That statute.
That is state statute.
You got, oh, for heaven's sake.
I
Never
asked
said
the
that.
same question.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thank you.
sorry.
That 16-year-olds can be election officials.
But I did it.
Yes. Further questions related to our attendance policy, Board President Nichols?
Thank you, Chair. Okay, I'm trying to quickly scan the things that look the same and different. So I see all of the ways that a student is excused. Do we have anywhere in this policy, maybe we do and I just didn't get to it yet, definition of prolonged absence? Because I noticed in one of the ways in which you can be excused, number 2, I don't know, it's like a two sub-paragraph says the time period for an excused absence under this policy shall not exceed 30 days. So if somebody were to get to the 31st day, does that then become a prolonged absence, or does it kick into a different type of absence?
So the definition of chronic absenteeism, so prolonged, is actually 10 days. So we respond to students when they're missing up to 10 days in a semester. So that's for our excused absences. So that's this is a state statute tied to the first definition right here. So it's just what our state statute says. You can't above this, so appointments can't be more than 30 days a year.
Oh,
So that's a state statute connected to that dentist, chiropractor, psychologist.
I see,
Yes.
okay,
But for our practices, after 10 days of excused absences, we respond with a chronic absenteeism support, and then 5 unexcused absences, we respond with habitual truancy support.
okay.
So essentially, in many respects, attendance, whether excused or unexcused, is important, and so we want to be supporting schools and families to have kids in school regardless if they're excused or not.
Right, okay, so thank you for that. I guess let me just go back to that first page where it says notification of absence required. And then you see A, single absence, B, prolonged absence, C, absence of more than 5 days, D, repeated unexplained absence, and tardiness. So I think what I was trying to figure out is the prolonged absence, is that in this policy and I just didn't see it yet?
Like what defines prolonged?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
the definition of that. Cause I don't think I saw it, but I wasn't sure.
This was Neola language recommended for us to add so that families understood how to submit for an absence. So written and oral, I think we could.
I think it's good feedback. that we
Yeah, I
can
think we
try to
can
align our
define
language.
what a prolonged, based on our definition of chronic absenteeism.
Yeah, I think it would be great if we could add something in a specific to a prolonged absence. Because we define truancy, habitual truant. We kind of delineate the kinds of ways that you can be excused. But I don't know that it's clear yet what prolonged means, and it could be left open for subjective interpretation. So that was
We
the
can
one thing
definitely
I
do that.
picked up on.
Thank you.
Board member Pearson and board member Vandermillen. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so my question is about days. I'm not seeing a definition of day in particular, like, so if a child is in a reoccurring doctor's appointment that is, every single week for the entire school year. Is it that one class period or those hours that they're missing that adds up to whatever 10 days? Or is it more so just because they're absent in that hour or a couple hours of the day every week? Then that's considered an absence. So I guess I'm just like,
Do you want to take that one? Yeah, it's because it's different.
Yeah, and so our state statute, as you can see below, it defines a day. We can define a day by part of the day or full day. So our board in 2012 decided that part of the day for absence means 1/3 of the day. So if a student is missing the minutes that equal up to 1/3 of the day, then they're missing a partial day. This then is also defined based on excused absence or unexcused absence. So if a student is missing school based on an appointment, that's an excused absence, which does not impact the missing part of the day. It's excused from their attendance track record, if that makes sense. So, yeah, go ahead, Cindy.
No, but I think what you're getting at is at what point whether excused or unexcused, chronic absenteeism is excused or unexcused.
Mhm.
So what portion of a day that a student misses would eventually add up to a full day, which eventually adds up to multiple days. And I think it's a practice
Yes, of
that,
1/3 of the day.
that 1/3 of the day. So
Yes,
if you miss 1/3 of the day
yes,
at all levels.
yes,
That equals a day of absence.
correct.
I think that's what.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yes,
yes, thank you. Yeah. And where is that on here?
that
'Cause
is,
I don't think I read it.
that is under, if you go to habitual truant. So
Okay.
that is definitions, habitual truant, a student will be considered habitual truant if a student is
Okay.
absent. So because our response for, and that's why I think we can add to the prolonged definition, our
Right.
response for excused absences is 10 days. And then our response to unexcused absences is 5 days.
Okay,
Maya, your question is practice is not policy.
right.
And so it is not in here. It is in our procedural manual that currently states 1/3 equals, not in here.
Correct.
Okay, okay. And the reason why I asked that is because I know that they're like, for when you call in or, you know, as a parent, or, I have some students who are dealing with certain things that it requires them to be out, but they don't have like a 504 plan or nothing like that, or IEP. And so I was just wondering like how that falls into some of this, but it sounds like it's more of a procedural, not a policy. But if we're going to define, prolong, then I think it might clear that up. And I don't know.
Might change our practice.
Or
that
might
we-
change it, okay.
Mhm.
Yeah. Board Member Vandermillen.
First my question, second a comment. On my question, are with the cross out on the age range, does that mean if they're under 5, they can start kindergarten?
that-
I saw it redlined on age of student.
So we have a policy that is age of students, and in the policy, that is age of students indicates when a student is
Got it.
able to enter into.
Got it,
Yeah.
and I thought that was stated there. Yeah.
Yes, and it was
Good
just, it was Neola's recommendation, but in the state of Wisconsin, you don't have to start school until 6 months. So we took that part to align with our state
Great.
statute.
My second point, and actually comment is, as I've said before, policy and procedure are almost impossible places to separate. Legally, it's a pain in the neck to do. But if we're going to do it that way, please can we put links to where that procedure is going to lie? The number of times I've gotten questions of where the practice rules are. And frankly, I don't know.
Yeah,
Would be really helpful.
we need to figure out where our practices and procedural manuals live. I think to what Lisa said before about being careful of having it linked into policy, that kind of, it's an ever evolving, like practice and procedure does change way more often than policy, but I think what we need to figure out is where those live and how they're accessible for people to know where to access them. And I think that right now lives currently in different apartments, lives
Back to you.
different places, so I think we need to have a better repository for where those live.
Right, the parents probably. too.
Why don't we just create a glossary? Do it that way and put these, this is the syllabus, this is where these pages lie, this is where this overlaps.
I think that's a great idea. I think we just have to figure out where, we'll gather all of it and figure out where that one-stop shop is.
Okay.
Board Member Moser.
Thank you. I guess first things first is like, we're in like an attendance crisis across the nations, like, so just context. And nobody knows what to do, like across the nation, like the answers are not clear. And so, like, that's what I'm bringing. That's what all they're trying to figure it out too. Okay, so thank you for your work on this, and this, both on the policy and on trying to figure out how to help kids get to school. I think I understand the part of day thing. I have questions about what that means for high school students who classes. And maybe that's just more of like an offline question about like how your work is going. And then I see on the bottom of page 2, this line, if a request of a parent is denied, the parent should be advised by the principal or designee of the probable penalty for the absence. I'm curious about that. Like, are we talking about truancy summons? Like, cause there is no, like, as far as I understand, there actually is no penalty outside of that. Which, you know, there are people who say, well, that's why kids aren't going to school. I don't agree, but. So I'm curious about what that line means to us here. And then I'm also curious about in the makeup coursework and exam section. I suppose, Lisa, this is like that policy versus practice spot. As like with what support shall a student be permitted to make up coursework? Like what does that mean? Right? Oh, sure. Welcome back. Missed you so much. Go ahead and make it up. Like, not gonna happen, right? That doesn't happen. So I'm curious about that. And then towards the end, there's a section on page 6, truancy plan, do we need this? And I'm just sort of curious, like, do we need this? This is all stuff. Yeah, I'm just curious about, it was like way towards the back with the question mark. So I'm curious about what folks are thinking about that.
It's state.
I'll start with the truancy, I can speak to that. Yes, we will need that statute.
Okay, and language just sort of follows what the statute requires.
For which section?
Truancy plan.
Yeah, it's literally copy and paste.
Yeah.
We didn't have it in
Yeah, we didn't have.
I see, okay.
our board documents. It's important to highlight what we do in response to truancy. So this is really our attendance support plans that our schools do. And so that response to truancy around a team member, around our letters that get sent out, our notifications via phone, text, and email. So this is really all of that. A part of that is attached to state statute. That's on track for, and so it's all attached to state statute and
Okay.
practice. And do you want me to answer your first?
Why don't you answer the first and I'll answer the second.
Go team. I was hoping you'd say that. For the first question, that is also state statute around the principal and the penalty.
Okay.
Penalty is truancy response. And so as you know, as a district, we have really shifted our mindset in this and how we practice this within the last decade, but really within the last 5 years. So we no longer ticket at a truancy level. We really respond with an attendance support plan. So that's really like, what can we do to get rid of these barriers? We had the research with MEP that really showed us attendance shows a basic need or something is not met. So it's really a response of like, how can we work with you? What do you need? So state statute says penalty, but how we practice is really like a response plan, supporting you and discussing the next steps you need, which might be outside referrals.
And then like this is like, the thing is, this doesn't happen, right? Like the parent of a habitually truant child is not calling every day and saying, my kid's gonna be gone. And the principal's like, oh, that's not an excuse. Like, okay.
So that state statute, if you read the state statute, if you're ever wanting to do something more fun. If you go to the 1816, it really talks about how school districts appoint somebody as an attendance in our state statute says officer, but that's really our attendance points of contact in MSD, which are school social workers. So really our school social workers work with the admin to support in response. So when our students are truant, we do that attendance support plan. And in our district, we really look at like, hey, what was going on? And we go back and we do excuse absences if they align with our attendance codes.
Got you.
And then
So you want me to answer the coursework one?
Yes.
So, Two things. One, I think it's critically important that it's there, so students have the opportunity to, they're able to master knowledge and skills and make things up. I think at the secondary level, middle school and high school, it's a lot easier these days because of Google Classroom, and because of the options that we have learned from COVID that are put in place. I think at the elementary level, it will look a little different, but I think being clear on what that means in terms of makeup, what our criteria for it is. But again, it is something that happens right now in practice, but inconsistently. And we just want to ensure that we create a process and an expectation that it happens, that every child, one absent, is allowed to. And that makeup might look different. It might not be the same assignment, right? You know, it could be X versus Y.
I'm gonna add myself to the deck, Board President Nichols.
Mine is real quick. Thank you. One of the questions I have now is, and I don't know if this would be a rare thing or a more common thing, but I'm wondering for families who have children who are expressing fear of coming to school because of bullying or perhaps being in a physical altercation. And the parent is like, I can't do it right now. My child is too distressed. Is that typically excused? Because it's not listed under many of the ways in which you can have an excused absence. And I don't know if that's rare or common, but I'm just curious if we would consider some language that talks about, maybe it doesn't have to say like for fear of coming to school, but I don't know if there's like a family decision that's in the best interest. I don't know if that's too vague or, because I know these reasons are pretty specific. So I'm just curious if we've thought about any excused absences.
Laura, you want to start and then I can just add a little, because this is something that has happened.
Okay.
Do you want, I was gonna do practice.
Oh, yeah, well, I think mine is too, but I think we could consider, I also want to be careful about how specific we get in terms of listing the different things in the policy, because we have to get like list everything, so I think we could think about broad language. But I would say right now that when there are cases like that, it is on an individual case by case basis, and many times we have worked with the school, with the attendance team and with staff to create modified plans if needed, opportunities to work virtually. Other times there are opportunities for internal where they transfer as well.
Wow.
So I think we've seen in practice that opportunity. And I think we'd have to think about what specific language would go in here to not get too narrow.
We have expansive codes beyond our board policy that you see here. Our state statute allows us to have expansive codes beyond just our policy.
Okay.
So we have codes like administrative excuse where, so if we're individually planning with a family so that we can get student access without creating harm for them,
Yeah.
we can use codes like administrative excuse, which is like you're with the social worker. So maybe we talk and we plan around you being with the social worker, we take tiny steps on figuring out a plan, but you're still coming into the building, and we're taking steps to get you into class. We also have family emergency, which is a very broad term. You don't see it in our policy, but we have the ability to add that to our practice. So we have the family emergency that our definition is really broad around what is occurring so that we can support you. And then we also have, which is the 10 days of pre-approved absences in our district, where depending on what the situation is, we might use the pre-approved absence code to help support while we're problem solving.
Wait, is the 10-day pre-approved in here?
Yes, that is what, so if you go to number 3, upon a parent's legal parent or legal guardian's prior written permission, provided a child might not be absent for more than 10 days per year. That's our code in practice. It's called pre-approved absence. So that's an additional code we have in the district that we've had since before 2000.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would agree that we start getting into too specifics, but I was just trying to see if there was something that would cover a family's choice, in that area.
And ultimately, our response is about support. And so like, if they're not coming to school because of this fear, it's our job to then think about what are those systems and practices that need to be in place as well. So like, we're not necessarily approaching it from a punitive perspective at all in general, but then this is just another opportunity for partnership.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, so I would love to see us on the number 5, that says serious illness or medical condition of member of the media. I'm curious about where we kind of locate mental health in attendance and how we normalize students taking time for their mental health or mental health, the rehab families. It's not something I'm seeing named in this, and it is a practice I'm seeing for more and more districts in terms of policy is embedding mental health days into the attendance policy. So there's a district in California that's giving students up to 3 days a year to take mental health days. They saw that students took 2 average improvements in students' attendance because they had the tools to have that conversation. I'm curious about what percentage of our students are chronically truant. So I think that's a relevant thing to engage in this conversation. I'm also curious about what percentage of our students attend 90% of the time or more, and the demographics of those 2 groups. Who is the most likely to be truant? Who is the most likely to attend more, and what does that tell us? The other thing I think I'd like to see us factor into this is transportation, right? We saw students miss significant amounts of instruction time because of our inability to provide adequate transportation. We've done some pretty great things to improve that and reconcile that, but that is the reality. And if our providing transportation becomes a barrier to attendance, I think we have to factor that. In order to be fair to our young people. I also think it's relevant to take into account, are our students who get dropped off by their parents more likely to attend than our students who are relying on us for transportation? The other thing I was curious about is how we factor suspension into this. So how many of our students are missing 10 or more days of school because they are being suspended, right?
Yeah.
And when do we start to look at our own practices and how our students miss out on instruction time because we are using that as a tool to discipline. I also am curious about our students who are chronically absent and what their relationship is to suspension, right? So does suspension make you more or less likely to be chronically absent? And I'm hoping you all can provide me with some data related to that. I think the last thing I'll say around like my ability to vote for the policy, and I think it's a pretty comprehensive policy overall, and I appreciate the work done to get this in front of us and help us to update this, is really in terms of, you know, the operationalized point, right? I think all of us want to be able to control quality of our students' experiences from the policy level. And the truth is that is about how you operationalize the policy. And so when I was working at East High School, I had a student who came in, young white student, said, hey, I'm gonna miss 2 weeks of this semester. It's 10 days because I'm going on a learning trip for my church. And the teacher said, oh my gosh, write a couple poems about your experience and, you know, we'll see you when you get back. Then I had a student who missed 2 weeks because her mother died. And that exact same teacher piled work onto this kid to the point of her actually never coming back to that class. She was so overwhelmed by the lack of compassion she experienced after she lost her mom, that she did not feel like she could participate anymore. So I think like how we factor in those dynamics is relevant and has material consequences for our kiddos, right? If we have one attitude towards this kind of student because they're gone for this kind of reason, a different attitude because of this student. The other thing though, I think is a factor is how often do teachers know? So the one area where I'll give the teacher the benefit of the doubt is when the kid was going on the service trip for church, that kid knew ahead of time. sat down, arranged that with the teacher, said, I want to get the work so I don't fall behind. When your mom dies, you don't usually know like the day that that's gonna happen and how long you'll be gone and what it's gonna take to plan her funeral. So, you know, how you factor in the expected versus the unexpected, and how teachers find out, right? Do all of our educators know if a student spent the weekend at Meritor Hospital after attempting suicide, right? It's 2 days because they were hospitalized. So how do we actually communicate that, those things? I think, you know, I think the quality of this is about the practice. I think the policy can be great and comprehensive. But if we don't have the practices that encourage compassion and understanding of what is happening for students, the policy will fall short of serving our well. So my questions in order to vote for it are really around how we factor in transportation and suspension, how our own practices impact young people's ability to be in attendance at school. I also do want to know how many of our students are chronically truant and what the demographics are, and how many of our students are, you know, attending 90% of the time and more, and what those demographics look like. Board Member Vandermeulen?
Yes, I think that I agree with Ali's point on the on mental health days, but I also want to stress on the illness that it's frankly no one else's business. The amount of the ableism that is on regarding chronic illness, regarding the so-called perfect attendance, which no one with pre-existing health conditions could ever meet, has gotten to the point where I think after the pandemic, people are like, is it really worth it? Am I allowed to have any kind of protection there? And I'm starting to see and wonder, absence-wise, if that's what we're seeing. Parents who are saying, I'm not going to put my kid through this week. This happened, you know what, they need a break, and I'm going to make that decision. And I think we are seeing that. So I think anything that we could, I'm not saying get rid of attendance requirements. I am saying, though, that the more rigid we make them under the state statute, which drives me crazy, and God knows I've written the legislature enough and will continue to do so. But very simply, if we can provide as much compassion as possible, as someone who always watched the perfect attendance ceremony, and I wanted that ribbon. Okay, I wanted the stupid ribbon. I don't know why I wanted it, but I wanted it, okay? And so very, very simply, there's gotta be a better way of doing this.
Thank you.
That's it.
Thank you.
Further discussion from board members? I see Board Member Simpkin, and then
I just wanted to let you know that we do have a transportation code. It's just not in our board policy. So we've used that in practice the last few years. So we do have an excused absence code for transportation, and that is absent or late due to transportation delay. So Metro, MMSD, any type of transportation that we provide, we have that code. So we have that data as well. And then we have 2 codes that support, so we have that statement around pre-approved absences, but we keep it really broad in our definition so that families can decide what their 10 days are per year. So some families do use that for mental health days. They respond to that. You know, we all approved the Infinite Campus new parent request, so parents can request that virtually online now or via phone. And then we also have the family emergency code that we also had made very broad, so that if there's a situation in whatever you define as your family, we can support you in that. And then we updated our illness
Good.
code in the sense the pandemic as well to have all physical, mental, any type of connection to illness as well. I
And
just want to add that.
I think we'll take this conversation back to our team, but I think one of the risks of differentiating between mental health and physical health is it's really sort of saying it's something different, when we really are saying that mental health and physical health are, you know, they operate sort of symbiotically, and if you're not mentally well, you know. So I think it's important that we consider that, because I think kids do need those options, and I want to make sure that we don't perpetuate like sort of further stigma around mental health versus physical health. So we'll do some digging on that and be ready to come back to you.
Yeah, I wanna say, I think there's complexity
Yeah.
in not saying something and saying that decreases stigma. I
Right.
think when you name things, you're usually doing that to normalize them. But when you say, oh, we're hoping that people know when we say health and wellness, or we say that we mean, holistically inclusive of mental health, I don't think we're there yet necessarily. So I think there's
Thanks.
some work to do, but thank you for responding.
Okay, so I was just gonna say what Ellie just said, so thank you for that. I think that we do need to call out mental health as being a part of a person's health. Because as a community, I don't think that we can assume that people understand that that's the intention without that down. And I would like to consider as a board including mental health days, a certain number of them, just in the way that Ali had suggested, as being a legitimate reason to be out. It's to take a little bit of time to take care for your own mental health. And so calling it out in two different ways, I'm looking for. My only question is, why do we have this policy and then another separate set of attendance codes? Rather than having that other set of codes that people are going to be embedded in this?
It allows us, well, you wanna take it?
I was actually gonna ask Monica if she wanted to
Okay.
explain why some codes are in policy and some codes are in practice. But we did consult with Ben on it, so I don't know if I should.
I wasn't a part of that
I
conversation.
know.
You share.
Okay, so when we did a lot of our research around attendance codes and what we have decided as a district around attendance codes attached to state policy, what we really wanted to make sure we do is have flexibility in what is occurring in our practice yearly. So being responsive to our families. We saw that when the pandemic hit, a lot of our codes were really rigid. It said immediate reliever. It said specific type of illness. That's why we added mental health to it. So we could not support and respond to our families. And so we were seeing students and families fall into habitual truancy because we couldn't get to the board in time enough to update our policy in response to our students and families' needs. So we have additional codes that we can add so that we can be responsive in supporting our families. For example, we added this district added inclement weather. So that's not a state statute, actually. That's something this board added to this. So that it could be a conversation of which we want to add to policy and which we want to keep practice so that we can be responsive to our students and families and update codes based on information that is occurring in society.
Cause I just wanna add one piece. There's some that we are required to have
Yes.
per state statute, which are the ones listed. And then
Yes.
in addition to that, as a system, we have created other codes to help us be very clear and distinguish what is happening with students, and those do change over time. Right? Like it helps us when we disaggregate data, the transportation was super helpful for us at the beginning of this year, when we were able to see by school, by class, by student, what was happening. That was a district created one. And so I just want to distinguish, there are some that we're required to have, so we have those in policy. There's some that are ones that we created that I think beyond that go into this conversation around practice and implementation, that I think we want to allow some fluidity to.
So I'm finding that hard to process. What it sounds like is that there's two separate sets of policies around attendance. There's a separate set of policies that the board doesn't oversee.
It's only codes that you put into Infinite Campus. It's
Mhm.
not a policy. It's literally what you enter into Infinite Campus for a student being absent.
So when you're saying code, you're like talking about like.
TRN is a code that we put into Infinite Campus for transportation that says the reason the student was not there is because
Their bus was late.
it was an issue of, yes.
So do all of those fit into a category?
In the state
In the
statute.
policy?
Yes, exactly.
Okay,
Yep,
now I understand.
yeah, this.
I'm good with that. Thank you.
Yeah, this is to support our schools, like if a family calls and says, our car broke down, we then have a list of codes where our schools can say, okay, what is occurring for you? Sounds like this is a family emergency, we can now excuse your student, or we haven't heard from a child, all of a sudden they hit truancy, 5 days has passed, we found out a family member had passed. We can then go back in and excuse their codes, so that's what I say with practice, that's the practice.
Okay, yeah, the word code completely thrown. me
Yes,
off.
that's
fair.
Now I understand.
Oh, the daily work,
And I-
yes, got you.
Yeah, thank you.
We're all learning.
And I take back my question, because that was my question.
Board member,
That was,
okay. We're gonna move on to the last policy.
Thank you both.
Thank you, everyone.
Have a
Yay,
lovely-
attendance.
Our next colleague, the last policy that, we have. Is our policy on English learners. Jesse, would you mind pulling that one up? Again, in your packet, you have two documents. This one is a little easier, cleaner, I think, for us, to check, but, I'm gonna turn it over to my colleague Leah Zepeda Bond, who is our Director of Multilingual Programs and Services.
Shall we? Yeah. Ali. We just have a few people. She asked if she should wait. What happened? Until folks come back.
oh, from Western.
I feel like historically, if folks don't ask for a recess, we just kind of go.
Okay, yep,
Just looking.
all right,
I think most of us are here.
thank you.
The policy that you have here that has been sort of, it's an update around terminology that has shifted over the past decade since this policy was last revisited. So it shifted terminology. Learners is one of the things that you can see throughout here. Most of this policy is, well, actually, all of this policy is based in state statutes. And so not a lot of wiggle room within here. You'll see references to our former departments that no longer are moved. It's sort of a more generalized statement about members overseeing the Office of English Learners can referred to here. And then the additions that have been added are consistent with the NEPA policy. For example, referencing our state statute around bilingual education and requirements in terms of making sure that those programs exist. And so that's really what you're gonna see in updates here.
Thank you. Any discussion or questions? Board member Mosner Feldman.
Thank you. I noticed that this one didn't, in definition 1A, there was still the his and hers, which is editing. And then I had a question about, in section 5 on page 3. It says the district shall submit the report of EL students to the Department of Public Instruction as required by law. And I was just curious, the word I'm looking for. What like, is that a specific report or like what do they?
So
It's a specific set of 50 reports, you know?
Right. That is terminology directly from Neola's policy. There are several different things that have to be reported every year.
Okay.
This is just letting us as a district, hey, we are going to on what the requirements are. And it's, I think, purposely vague so that as DPI updates what it is that it would like, we don't have to come back and.
Cool. Those are all my.
So I'll add myself to the deck just to ask, are parents of ELL students provided with this policy intentionally? They're given access to this policy?
So parents of English learners receive information once they enroll and you know, get this phone call about their home survey. Through the process, they get a document that describes like, here are the services that are provided, here are the things that your child you know, the assessments that were done. And at the end, it asked them whether or not they'd like to accept these services, decline these services, and so they're provided with information.
Would it be possible to ask them, would they like to see our policy on ELL? Would that be something to add? And would we be able to provide this policy to parents who have English language learners, as their students, or guardians who have English language learners as their students, in multiple languages?
I'm sure there is an opportunity. We tried to make sure that the forms that they receive have most of this information already in it. And so the question is whether or not that needs to be duplicative in that sense, or.
I guess if we're saying the materials we already provide include a lot of the policy, then the question becomes, what parts of the policy are we giving to parents and what parts are we not? And when there are things like this part C, parent or guardian will provide written notice of their child's qualification or services in language preference for home correspondence to the extent practicable, right? I think that is saying like, hey, the parent actually has to engage in a specific way. And I'm wondering where the parent is notified of that beyond this policy. And if the parent is notified of that in multiple languages, right? My understanding is if you go to board docs and you look at our policy suite, I don't know if there's necessarily a way to translate them embedded in board docs itself. Unless I've missed something about board docs.
So when parents enroll their students for the first time, they're asked like which languages they speak. And then through that process, when the school is contacting them to make a determination using the state uniform home language survey, they're provided that information in the language that they understand. And then once they get their document, that is also provided in language.
Okay. Any response to what parts of the policy are people getting in the materials we already provide versus which parts of the policy are people not getting?
We can go through and do that correlation.
Okay.
But I'm pretty sure
It's pretty well covered. I'm like, I appreciate that, that's nice to hear. That's it for my questions. Board Member Nichols?
Thank you. I'm just from my own understanding, for number 4, programming and support services available to EL students. Is the programming and support services instructional? Or are they inclusive of other support services?
so within the statutes, the programming refers to English as a second language, bilingual programming. Those are pieces that are all encompassing. And so it can be that they're in a program where they're receiving regular education, and in both bilingual programs, and in English only programs, there was support for instruction in terms of and developing the English language.
Okay, so when it says students, that first sentence, the board shall provide all qualifying EL students an effective instructional program and support services. The support services are tied to the instruction. Correct.
They're in addition, so they're considered that in the law, that's the word supplemental or support is in addition to the regular education that everyone else is receiving.
Okay, so it's still instruction. Yeah, okay. So I guess my wondering is, and this may not be tied to this, but I was curious. Okay. I know that this policy, just bear with me for a second. I know that this policy is specific to instructional program and supportive services. And I'm wondering if we have a different policy or if there's anything that would be inclusive of other types of support to a student or their family who is identified as EL that would impact their engagement in instruction. So for instance, if you're maybe a newer immigrant family, you may be assessed for services under this. And it might be discovered by a bilingual resource, you know, support person. That, oh, this family also needs help with housing, food service, you know, like access to food. And all of those things are connected to how this student would actually be able to get to school and learn.
Do you
So
wanna
I'm
put
just
the
curious if
migrate-
that,
Well, I think. so
and
there's-
I don't wanna
Yeah.
put this all on like an immigrant. I'm just saying,
Mhm.
are there other ways, and maybe it doesn't sit in this policy, maybe it sits somewhere else?
Yeah, I think that, so within this policy, because it's referring just to English language instruction. That's
Okay.
kind of where the scope of this lies.
Okay,
There are services under Title I that are immigrant, migrant, refugee supports.
okay,
that The state actually has changed the way in which they do identification. So now the state is the one identifying students as qualifying for migrant services for the migrant program.
Mm.
They notify us, and then we connect them to resources within the district, whether it's via social work or psychology. So that's sort of encompassing that.
okay,
At the same time, we know that not all of our students will fall under that migrant education program.
Right.
Like you pointed out, our staff in school buildings will notice that students need XYZ services. They're still connecting them to the resources at the school level in terms of social work, support, colleges. Thing,
okay,
in order to get those resources.
And we have a staff person who's specifically for that, that also supports that and helps navigate that for schools and families.
okay. And that sits outside of this policy, because this policy is specific to the instruction. Okay, great, thank you. Okay. I don't think anything else.
All right, there's no further questions or discussion from the board. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, motion carries 6-0. Thanks so much, y'all.
Not my computer.